Hammered growth, declining revenues, a colossal funding squeeze, and a never-ending firing spree. Is India's startup boom slowing down? Look around you, a host of unicorns are in crisis. They're firing employees, cutting down on costs, delaying their IPOs, and cancelling buyouts. The question is why? The answers are several. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. My name is Priyanka Sharma. And on this episode, we'll discuss why India's startup ecosystem is in a mess. Why is it slowly going from boom to bust? Let me begin with some numbers now. Since 2016, Indian startups had been raising $10 to $11 billion in every quarter. In fact, in the third quarter of 2021, they raised a total of $14 billion in funding, way more than the $3 billion that they got back in 2020 during the pandemic. Compare that with 2022. In the last quarter of this year, the total funding for Indian startups fell by 40% to $6.8 billion. That's a new low. And this funding squeeze is just one problem. The second is falling revenues, a decline in profits. Between January and July 2021, almost 29.2% of Indian startups were profitable. In 2022, the number fell to 25.7% during the same period. The third problem is dented growth. As of October this year, India was home to 107 unicorns, with a total valuation of $340 billion. Out of this, 41 unicorns worth $93 billion were born in 2021. But this year, only 21 unicorns were born. Their value, $26 billion. For the unversed, unicorn is a term used in the venture capital industry. It is used to describe a privately held startup company that is valued at or above $1 billion. In 2022, India added just 21 unicorns. That's another fall. So what do these figures tell you? That after an extended period of sunshine, Indian startups are staring at a long and cold winter. Their growth has plateaued. Their revenues have flattened. Irrespective of which sector they operate in, almost every unicorn is facing challenges. Take the case of Byju, India's biggest edtech company and by far its most valued startup. It reported a loss of 4,500 crores in financial year 2021. These losses were 10 times its losses in the last 7 years. To make things worse, it clocked a revenue of more than 2,428 crores, and this was 14% below its revenue in 2020. That's not all. Byju became an edtech giant through a series of high-profile buyouts, multi-million-dollar acquisitions of other startups. In 2022, it faced challenges on this front too. Last we checked, it had delayed payments for a $1 billion acquisition of Akash, another valued edtech unicorn. Byju also has pushed its IPO, that is the initial public offering, by at least 9 to 12 months. Why? Because of macroeconomic factors, says the company. Well, it doesn't take a genius to guess which factors they are. Financial losses in almost every venture. Such is the state of affairs that Byju is also laying off its employees. It plans to sack 2,500 employees in the next 6 months. Some of these layoffs have been put on hold to avoid scrutiny. But most are expected to go through, sadly. And by the way, Byju is not the only startup on a firing spree. There are a host of others. Like the edtech firm Vedantu, it has laid off more than 600 employees this year. Cars24 did something similar. It laid off around 600 employees from its workforce of 9,000. Then we have Ola. It has apparently fired a whopping 2,100 contract workers this year. This is in addition to the 1,400 staff members that it laid off back in 2020. The list of startups sacking employees is slightly longer. Lido has fired over 900 employees. Unacademy has sacked more than 1,000. White Hat Junior has laid off 800. M-Fine has let go of more than 500. I could go on. Trell has fired more than 300 employees. Falenco has laid off at least 200. Meesho has sacked more than 150. Blinkit has fired more than 1,500 employees. MPL, 100. Front Row, 150. And OK Credit, more than 40 employees. This layoff saga is striking. Reports say that a total of 6,000 employees working for Indian startups have been shown the door. In the months ahead, this figure may grow to more than 10,000. So what explains this tragic twist? Why are Indian startups on a firing spree? Again, there's no one reason. A slew of factors have led them here. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, stock market crashes, supply chain disruptions, rising cost of capital, obsolete pandemic models, and a lack of innovation. They're proving to be lethal for Indian startups. To start with, the conflict in Ukraine has triggered a global funding slowdown. The fears of a recession have spooked investors. They're unwilling to make new bets or take risks. Look at these figures. India's share in the total venture capital funding that went to Asia this year fell by half to 14%. During the same period last year, it stood at 22%. That's a 1.6% decline in venture capital funding into the country. So what explains this? Experts say that this is because several hedge funds and investors are pulling back from global markets to focus on core markets. In other words, they have started looking inwards. They're prioritizing local markets instead. They're trying to strengthen them to withstand the effects of the Ukraine war. The second reason is crashing stocks. Indian startups are feeling the heat from the stock market. Earlier this year, after a major decline in stock prices globally, startups in India faced a massive drop in valuation. Their stocks tumbled for days at stretch. Among the big losers were Nykaa, Paytm, Zomato, Policy Bazaar, RateGain, Cartrade. They all saw losses of more than $1.7 billion in their holdings. This not only depleted their coffers, but also hindered their growth abysmally. The third reason behind the startup slowdown is lack of innovation. India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. But in terms of innovation, it pales in comparison. Between 2015 and 2016, India applied for just 1,400 patents. Japan applied for 44,000. China, 29,000. South Korea, 14,000. In fact, India ranked 46th in the Global Innovation Index, trailing behind countries that have lesser startups than India. According to IBM, 77% of venture capitalists and investors said that this lack of innovation in Indian startups, the fact that they're not building new technologies or producing new business models, is what's making their funding shrink. Investors are unwilling to give money to brands that are not willing to experiment and grow. The fourth reason is obsolete models. You see, during the pandemic, Indian startups launched a host of new verticals that were tailor-made to suit the lockdowns and restrictions. 2 years on, the restrictions have ended. Schools have reopened. People are back at work. They're shopping at malls, not online. They're dining outdoors, not ordering in at home. So the customers they acquired during the pandemic are slowly leaving. Startups have been left struggling to make up for these losses. And the fifth reason is a wrong product market fit, meaning a product's ability to satisfy a particular type of market in order to stay in business. Many startups have failed at doing this. Take the case of dinner. You might have come across its ads in newspapers or TV. This company allowed customers to select a recipe and order pre-measured ingredients with instructions. Say you had to make butter chicken. You could order everything that goes in it on dinner. Most customers weren't too taken with the idea. They still preferred their local grocery shops for ingredients than ordering them online for one single recipe. Especially now, when the lockdowns are over, the result, the founder of dinner is writing stories on the lessons he learned from the failure of his startup. These were just a few reasons. There are many more factors that explain why India's startup story has gone sour, why they're reporting losses, and they're facing a funding crunch, and why they're laying off their employees. The question is, what next? What lies ahead for India's startup sector? To be honest, there's no easy answer to this. But the government of India is doing its best to restore the startup sector to pre-pandemic levels. It has launched a slew of measures to help them recover, like funding incentives, legal support, credit guarantees, fast-tracking patent applications, and organizing forums to help them grow. To put it very frankly, India is trying its best to build a sustainable ecosystem to help these companies survive. The onus is now completely on them. They need to show the drive to experiment and evolve. At the same time, put an end to outdated, ill-thought, and questionable business practices.